you've captured a portrait and you're ready to start editing it inside of ON1 Photo RAW 2026, but you're not quite sure exactly how to do it. Well, today I'm going to show you how I like to approach portrait editing inside of ON1 Photo RAW 2026. So let's jump in. So here we are inside of ON1 Photo RAW. Now, if you'd like to follow along and download this file, consider joining the channel and you'll be able to get access to this file and then also future files as I continue to make tutorials like this. So first thing that I want to do is get rid of this little arm that's over here, or this finger. So what I'm going to do is click on my eraser tool, and that's going to be the third icon on the left, or third icon from the bottom on the left. And I'm just going to use the basic perfect eraser here. All right. And then I'm just going to hover over this area, do a quick little paint, and then let it go. ON1's going to think itself through, and since this background is pretty plain gray, it's pretty simple for ON1 to figure out exactly what to do. And that's the first step that everyone will ever need to do with your images, which is pay attention to your backdrop. And today, again, we have a very simple backdrop that we're working with. But if you had a more distracting backdrop, then maybe you need to do a little bit more work. My recommendation: pay attention to your backdrops as you are photographing to make sure that you're getting very simple backdrops and your subject, or the person that you're photographing, is going to stand out in the frame. Now, with all of that jargon out of the next step is to actually start to work with this image and, correct some of the tones. So I'm going to show you the easy button, which is Brilliance AI. This is a great tool that will just automatically edit your image. And so let's go ahead and click that. And ON1 has gone through and made changes to this photo. Now I'm going to hit Command and comma really quick to pull up my preferences. And then I'm going to click on Brilliance AI at the far right here. And you'll notice I have some settings. So you can go ahead and pause the video here if you want to copy the settings that I'm using. But the one that I want to show you that's important for portraits is right here. Apply Portrait AI to prominent faces. All right. What this is going to do is when ON1 sees your images, if it notices that there is a face in the photo, it's going to try and use Portrait AI on that image, and that's going to help you. All right. Now, again, this is just one of those things. If you're going to use Brilliance AI, just know that you may want to turn on this feature right here for Portrait AI. Now, I want to be clear, this was a photo that was taken in a studio setting, so I had complete control over my lighting, and I had the exposure pretty much where I needed it to be. In fact, it may even have been a little too hot. I have some shadows there and some bright spots on our teeth that we're going to clean up here in a second. But if you're outdoors and you're photographing, just make sure that you're paying attention to your histogram to make sure that your exposure is not going to be too hot or too underexposed when you come into the editing space. Now, with all of that jargon out of the way, that's the simple edit. So again, before and after, Brilliance AI is just doing all of the heavy lifting. And I like this, so I'm just going to hit snapshot, and I'm going to click on new snapshot. And we'll call this BAI edit, just so that way we keep up with what's going on here. Now, I'm going to come down here to the color section, and I'm just going to pull the saturation out of the image. And so now I can see where all of the tones are really sitting in the overall photo. And I like this way of working because it doesn't make me distracted with all of the color. And so what I want to do is make sure that I have clear, defined edges around my subject and the background, which in this case I do. I photographed it that way. And so again, a lot of the work happens in camera, but in post-production, you can enhance that. So in the event that maybe she wasn't actually popping off the backdrop the way that I would like her to, what I can do is come over to local, and then I can click on subject, and ON1 is going to find the subject in the frame. Again, in this photo, it's going to be pretty easy because this is a studio portrait. If I press the letter O, you can see it found her pretty well, and it even masked out her hair pretty good. It didn't get all of her hair, but I don't know if I really need every last strand of hair, right? And then what I could do is either increase or decrease her exposure, but more importantly, I can increase the contrast between her and that backdrop, making her stand out just a little bit more. All right. And you don't need to go crazy overboard with this. It's just one of those things that you may need to do depending on how your image was photographed. But again, in this particular image, I took care of that in camera with the lighting choices and the way that I directed the light on the subject. The next thing that I want to do is I want to look at how the shadows, like the black point and the white point, are set up. So if I come over to levels, you can see I'm getting a full range of contrast here. And that's happening because the black point was pulled down. So if I pull this back to 0, you can see there's just a slight little gap between the histogram and the blackest point in the image. And if I hold down the J key, you can see I've recovered all of those blacks that we were losing earlier, but I also have some highlight issues. And so by holding down the J key on the keyboard, I can come up here to highlights. I can just pull down on the highlights until those get under control for me. And now I have a really good tonal reference, and I just modified what Brilliance AI did. Now, again, you could do all of this yourself, but ON1 has given us tools that allow us to work a little bit more efficiently. I won't say faster because I don't think that it's a good practice to get into working faster as much as it's a good practice to work more efficiently. I need to bring my color back into this photo, so I'm just going to go ahead and pull up on the saturation. And for this particular image, I know that I want full color. Typically, I leave it a little bit more muted, but that's not the style of image that I'm going for on this particular image. But I don't need to oversaturate it. So I think 0 is probably right where it needs to be. Brilliance AI also increased the vibrance just a little bit here. So if I pull down on the vibrance, you can see it just dulls out the image a little bit. And I don't necessarily want that, so I'm just going to pull that back up. The next thing that I want to do, and I probably should have done this before I started messing with that vibrance slider, is I want to work with temperature. And this is the white balance aspect of the image. And if you're not familiar with white balance, I have a video talking all about white balance. So check the description box below and I'll let you watch that to get more familiar with it. But what I will say in this particular context is the more blue or the cooler I make the image, the more commercial I feel the image becomes. And that's kind of the style that I want to go with for this particular image. But more importantly, what I want to do is change the color of that gray backdrop to contrast with the pink blazer that the model was wearing. And what that does is it allows me to separate her even more. All right. There's 3 ways of separating your subjects in a photo. The second one is color separation, which is what we just did. I took the blue and separated it, or I took the backdrop, made it blue, so the pink stands out a little bit more. And then the third one is texture. Things that have more texture stand out more than things that don't have texture. So those are the 3 things that we're going to be looking at when for any photo, but specifically to make this photo pop. That's kind of where I'll always keep my mind going. So hopefully that made some sense. Let's take a look at the before and the after. And I think that we have a really, really good starting point for stylizing this image. Now, you could just stop right here. If you are photographing a series of cataloged images and this is the stylistic look that you're going for, you could stop right here, render this out, and go on about your day. But I want to go a little bit further with this particular image. And, you know, I'm noticing now that I have some little things on her shirt that I should clean up, but I'm not going to focus on doing that in today's video because that's as simple as just using the healing brush. Let's go ahead and get out of the healing section and really start working with this photo. Now, you would think the next step is to jump over to local. But if you're using Portrait AI, it's probably a good idea to jump into the Portrait AI tools to see what that's doing to your image. And for us to really see what's happening, I like to zoom in on the subject here and I'll just pull her over to the side there. And then we're going to click on portrait. Now I'm going to turn off portrait AI because I think that it's hard to see sometimes what's actually happening when the thing has been on the whole time that you've been editing. And honestly, I feel like it's done a great job straight out of the box, but I do want to talk through editing some of these things because this is a full portrait guide and I want you to know what to do with your images and kind of think through that. So the first section here is going to be skin. Let me just minimize the eyes, open up the skin section, and you can see I have retouching. Now it's set to 50%, and subtlety is always better when it comes to natural looking portraits. If you want those over the top portraits, by all means, go for it. But subtlety makes the most sense, in my opinion. And so I like to leave this relatively low, but if you want to get more fidelity and control over the retouching tools, you can crank this all the way up to 100%. It's going to overdo it, I think. And then that means you have to come in here and fine tune the blemishes, detail, smoothing, all of that stuff. Maybe there's too much detail going on, so let's just pull back on the detail. And mind you, this is really just trying to work out the skin. And the way that Portrait AI works, let me press the letter O so you can see the mask. It selects the skin on the face or the facial region. And it's probably easier to see that if I were to turn on the color overlay. And now she looks like Jim Carrey from The Mask. But with that being said, you can see how it starts to mess with the eyes over here. And so you probably want to clean those types of things up, right? So let's just pull back on the blemishes, and then I'm just going to paint over the eyes, and you can see what I'm doing there. And this is no different than any other photo editing practice. So if you learn anything, just know that when you understand how to use the tools inside of ON1 or any photo editing software for that matter, you can just apply the practices. All right. Now, I don't need to remove blemishes from the teeth. So I'm just going to go ahead, paint this away. And it doesn't have to be overly perfect, right? Because what I found is the masking does kind of blend pretty decent. So I usually don't have to make this perfect, but I am using a 100% feathered brush. So the edges, as much as they look sharp, they're actually fading pretty decently into the image as well. So just keep that in mind. Always, if you're going to paint away and you want to look as natural as possible, definitely consider using a 100% feathered brush and then just paint away as you see fit. So I think that looks pretty good. Let's recover the eyebrows here because I don't want her eyebrows. And a quick tip, if you are brushing away, let me just redo this. You'll notice that her eyebrows are a little bit larger towards the front end here. And as I get further back, the brush will be too big for that area. Well, what you can do is while you're painting is you can use the bracket keys while you still have the mouse key or the mouse click held down. You can use the bracket keys to make your brush size smaller as you progress through the eyebrow here or whatever you're painting. And it just helps you keep that edge look a little bit cleaner overall. And then of course you can just go back and clean up the edges as best as you can. So we'll just go ahead and paint through all of this just like so. And now I think I've cleaned up enough. I'm not worried about this strand of hair that's over here. It's really not that important. So I'll press the letter O, and you'll notice now when I increase the blemishes, those areas that are protected aren't actually getting affected by this particular slider. Now, of course, that's way too much. And this model, she actually has some pretty good skin. And so I don't need to go like crazy overboard. And then, of course, you can increase the smoothing, and that's just going to make the facial skin or the pixels there a little bit more blurred. It's up to you. Personally, don't like to over crank the smoothing, but again, I also like to pull down on the retouching here. So that's enough on the skin. I'm just going to pull down the retouching because I like a more natural look. And so if I turn this off and turn it back on, you can see how those edgy, punchy looks come out. But then when I turn on this skin mask, you can see it just softens up all of that detail that we don't really need in the face or isn't very flattering. And so we'll go ahead and close down the skin and we'll come into the face. Now, I lit her face pretty well, but in the event that your photo doesn't have a well lit face, well, you can come over here to brightness and you can brighten up those areas that you selected. And you can see how that is just brightening or darkening the face. So if it's too bright, you can just pull down and make it a little bit darker. But in most portraits, you usually want to brighten up the face just a little bit because you always want to give the impression that there's light in the face. All right, especially if the eyes are open and you get a catch light, you definitely want to make sure that that's enhanced. All right. In this example, her eyes are closed, so not a big deal, but something to keep in mind. This next slider, I stay away from it like it is the plague, and that is the slim face slider. I don't even like to imagine using the slider because people look the way they look. And it's our responsibility as the photographer to make them look as best as we possibly can in front of the lens. And so before you even snap the shot, my recommendation is you tell the subject to move around and pay attention to the sides that are the most flattering for them because they can't see themselves in the moment. Like, you have to be the person that they trust to capture them the best as you possibly can. All right. Now, I'm not saying that every single person is going to look like a stunning model, but every single person does have a very flattering way of coming through on the camera. And it's your job as the photographer to capture that, regardless of if you're a hobbyist or a professional or anything in between. All right. With that being said, ON1 has given us the tool that if you have a wide angle lens and you distort the face and it looks wide, well, you could slim the face down just a little bit and make that proportionate to reality of what the person actually looks like. Because if you're not familiar with this phenomenon, if you get really close with a wide angle lens, you start to spread out facial features. And the reason why a lot of portrait photographers use lens like 85, 100, 105, 200, anything in those ballparks is because it compresses the features of the face and makes them a little bit more flattering and keeps them proportionate to the individual. There are some use cases where a wide angle lens could and should be used in photography, especially if you're going for a stylistic approach. So just keep that in mind. Pay attention to what's happening with the lenses that you choose to photograph with, but also if you need to reduce the face just a little bit because the lens distorted the person and it doesn't look like that person, then by all means, come over here to the slim face or just use it however you want. Sorry for the long rant there, but I usually always leave that set to 0. That being said, you have your left eye size and your right eye size. This is really helpful when you have a subject that's looking away from you, similar to what I have here. So if her right eye, if I just go ahead and move that over, and this is as you're looking at the screen, by the way. It took me a while to pay attention to that because really this is her left eye, but ON1 is calling that the right eye because that's what I'm looking at. And you'll notice it's just making that eye a little bit larger. And so if you find that eyes are a little off balance from one another, one eye looks larger than the other, you can use this tool right here to make that eye bigger. Unfortunately, you can't use this tool to make eyes smaller. So just keep that in mind. Now you can use the warp tools over here to do something like that, but that's not for today's tutorial. So we're going to close down face because I try, like the main slider that I use here, just to be clear, is brightness, right? All the other sliders I typically never need to use. I think I can count maybe 1 or 2 times that I had to use the eye slider just to make eyes balanced. Now, here we have the eyes because, we're still talking about eyes. And this is a really helpful tool to make the eyes brighter. Now, in this particular image, it's not going to help us because we can't see the sclera or the iris or the pupil or anything. And that's really what this tool is designed for. So my recommendation, if the eyes are closed, just turn it off. You don't need it. I mean, I guess maybe if you want to bring some attention for the details, but you really don't need it, actually. Yeah. All right. Now, the next section, we're going to move through relatively quick because her eyes are closed and it's not really helpful for today's tutorial, but hopefully it'll make some sense. So you have this tool called eyes. Now, to make sure that the eyes are actually selected, first thing I recommend you do is click this little eyeball here and hover over the image, and you'll get the outline for where the eyes are. Now, this little green dot, this should be in the middle of the eye, all right? Wherever the pupil is when you have eyes that are open, you want to put that little green or turquoise looking dot on the eye itself or the pupil. And then you want to reshape this portion to fit the inside of the eye. Now, again, her eyes are closed, so it's kind of just a guessing game. You can choose whatever you want. And then, of course, these edges or these far corners, you want to put those into the corner of the eyes. Now, you're probably wondering, well, Chris, why are you doing this for her eyes when they're closed? Like, what good is that? Where it comes in handy is this bottom slider here where it says dark circles, but if I pull that down, it's dark. And if I pull it up, it's a little bit brighter. Now, because that is kind of looking away from us, and I know the way that I lit this particular scene, the light was already coming from like camera right shining down on her, and you could tell that that's how it's happening. Really large source, so everything is pretty well illuminated. I'm not overly concerned about this being darker, but typically in a photo or in a portrait, you may have a light side and a intentional shadow side. So just pay attention to that, but clean up dark circles. It just helps with your models and your subjects looking a little bit more refined and polished. And then the last slider here is the brow enhance. And when you increase this brow enhance, you could overdo it and sometimes you can underdo it. So just find where it makes the most sense for your particular image. I don't need to overly emphasize her eyebrows in this particular image. I don't think that it's helpful, but if you have some eyebrows that are getting lost in your subject's face, well, you have an eyebrow enhancer. And so I'm going to go ahead and close that. But if I turn this off and turn it back on, you can see what it's doing to that eye region, mostly that dark circle aspect and the eyebrow enhance. But if the eyes were open, then you would see a lot more and you would have a lot more capability. All right. And then we'll come down to the mouth. Now, the good news is we can see all of the elements of the mouth that we would care to use for this tool. So first thing is you got to select the mouth. We're going to click on the little icon here to select the mouth. And very similar to how the eyes have this little magenta dot, you want to put that essentially in the center of the mouth. And this is just going to give you a point of reference that you can always come back to. All right. And it's going to make the masking tool proportionate to that area. So I like to put it usually like right between a tooth above the tongue. It sounds weird, but it makes sense as it'll hopefully make sense as we start to work here. But what you want to do is grab the corner and pull that back into the corner. And then you just start to move these little sliders, these nodes around until it fits the shape of the subject that you are working with. And you want the lips to be in between the lower line, I guess this first little threshold between the lower line and the middle line, and then the top line and the middle line here. So hopefully this is making sense, but essentially you want the lips to be in between there because that's where your lips or the lips of the subject are going to be impacted. And you just want to contour this around those features. And then I'm going to take this corner and put it where the corner of her mouth ought to be. And we'll just pull this out because her lip comes out this way. And you just play around with this as best you can. It's not always going to be perfect, but you do want to reshape this as best as you possibly can to make it look like it fits your model, right? And I think I'll go like that. So once you have that, now it's time to start working with some of the sliders here. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up on the teeth whitening, and you can see how that's just brightening those areas in between there. Now, I am getting some spillover on the outside here and the outside there, but I don't think you could really tell. So if I turn this off and turn it on, yeah, you could see it when you're really looking for it, but will anyone see that when the photo is printed or delivered finally? Probably not. So I'm not going to worry about it. And then you have lip vibrance. Lip vibrance, in this case, it's not really making her lips any more vibrant, so I don't think I'm going to use it. But you can see that on the outside of the lips here, it's making it a little bit more vibrant. My personal preference for anything dealing with the lips is to use a local brush, which is something that we'll probably jump to here in a second. And then you have lip brightness, and you can make the lips brighter or darker. So depending on where you're going, maybe in this case, it could be helpful to have her lips a little bit darker, which gives a little bit of contrast for the bright teeth and her brighter skin because of the way that I lit this scene. So just keep that in mind. And then we have lip hue, which is just going to change the colors of the lips. Now, that was a pretty long discussion on using portrait AI, but hopefully you have some understanding of that. Now, where I really like to enhance my portraits is in the local section, but I always go to portrait AI first to make sure that I'm getting the best that I can out of the portrait aspect. And so I like to use local. So we're going to work with the lips using local. I'm just going to add a brush, and then we're going to come down here to vibrance. I'm just going to pull that up and then maybe even add in some magenta. We can always tailor this later. And then I'm just going to very gently paint over the lip section here. And this is just one of those things that I recommend everyone tries out initially to see if it's helpful. And if it's not, then just delete it. All right. I don't have a style brush for this type of thing because it's just easy to make this. But now that I have that applied, what I like to do is just pull down on the opacity and then fade it in, right? Make it look as natural as possible. That's always the goal. Make things look as natural as possible. So if I hit Command and we hold down the backslash key, this is what we came into Camera Raw with, and this is where we've gotten so far. Again, this is more of a commercial photo that I'm going for, and so I want to make it a little bit cooler, and I'm leaving space on the right side for copy because this is a brand photo for this particular individual here. One of the things that I need to do for this particular image is really make the contrast of the colors pop. And so I'm going to add in a color enhancer, and then I'm going to grab my hue picker tool, and I'm just going to click and drag on her blazer. That brings me to the magentas, and so I'm good to go there. I'm just going to double click that to reset it, and then I'm just going to saturate it a little bit and maybe darken it down so that way she stands out a little bit better in that photo or in her blazer, right? And then I need to do the same thing for the background, but in this case, what I need to do for the background is darken it down just a little bit, like so, and then increase the saturation so that way it is more blue, right? And so this, to me, looks like the final edit of the image. So I can go without this and then with this. Now, the other thing that is always helpful in some form, sometimes commercial photography, is providing a little bit of a vignette around the side. And for this image, I think I'm just going to go with 2 reflected gradients. And so I'm just going to click on gradient, and then I'm going to come to the top, select on reflected gradient, and then rotate this around. And I'm going to darken this back portion and darken all the way over here. Maybe not as much because I want to show the light coming in, but I definitely want to darken this portion on the left side here. So we'll just darken that down like so and pull this in just a little bit more and fade that. And so this may be a little too aggressive, so we'll pull that back, just playing around with it to find the right feel and maybe just pull that off. So turn this off, turn it back on. you could see how it just pulls you into the model. Don't have to do it. It's just something that I like to do. If you got questions, leave them in the comment section below, and I will do my best to answer all the questions. Now, if you are a member here on the Free Will Photos YouTube channel, you'll have access to all of the files associated with this particular edit, so you can go and inspect them for yourself and unpack it to figure out exactly what was happening and follow along with this tutorial. And if you are a member, I want to say thank you for joining. Now, if you'd like to pick up ON1 Photo RAW and save a little bit of money in the process, consider using the coupon code located in the description box below. Now, if you'd like to learn how to use ON1 Photo RAW a little bit faster and have dedicated training, consider signing up for a training call with me. A link for that is located in the description box below. Until next time, I want you to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.